Alright guys, so this latest chapter of My Hero Academia was a very special one. I mean, this was no doubt one of the most important chapters in the history of the series thus far, as it addresses concepts presented to us with the very first chapter and introduces some pretty interesting implications for the remainder of the story. If you are really enjoying My Hero Academia right now and haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Plot Armor with notifications on, because we of course have you covered. With the previous chapter having apprehended the villain known as Dictator during the very beginning of their encounter with Deku, Kirishima, Invisible Girl, and Oyama would pass him off to Endeavor before being instructed to join Hawks and the others to keep the area secure. Now Hawks would actually propose the possibility of just having Best Jeanist secure Deku, but in seeing the determination of these students, Endeavor would tell him not to let anyone interfere. From there, with Deku encased in his pillar of ice, Shoto would call out to him, questioning if this could possibly be the very state that All For One wants Deku in, that he may very well take this opportunity to attack Yue. From here, now begging his friend to let them join in the fight alongside him. But now utterly consumed by the words of All For One and the burden of his quirk, Deku would break free from the ice, telling them all that this fight was strictly between One For All and All For One, that the rest of them could not possibly keep up. And he was out of there. As Deku fled, we would have Mineta, who would be thrown by Sue, grab hold of him as well, now telling him that it wasn't his power that made him special, then actually breaking the internet by saying that he had fallen for him because even when Deku was horribly scared, he still managed to find a way forwards with everyone anyway. Now, in regards to the bisexual implications a number of people have accredited this instance to being, absolutely have your fun. If that's your takeaway, sure. I for one do not believe that is the literal sentiment being expressed here, as it is a bit of a contextual reach, but again, take it as you will. But from there, Uraraka could not even get the words out before Deku would use his false 100% power to jettison away. But everyone was ready for this, as in combining a number of their abilities, they were able to continue giving chase to him. As Bakugo blasted off, he couldn't help but think of all the things he needed to say to Deku, but for the time being, the one best suited for this level of speed was none other than their class president, Ida. As in midair, Ida would grab hold of Deku's hand. All of his friends refused to let him go, and the pain of solitude was hard for Deku to deny. With this latest chapter, as Ida clutched onto his hand, Deku knew that he needed to let go. However, he could not call forth the strength to do so, a combination of not actually wanting to and the sheer level of exhaustion he was experiencing. Uraraka would then release the effects of her quirk, causing the two to begin hurtling downwards, as Ida would worry if they could land safely, then noticing Kirishima on the ground. And the impact from that high up was major, but even still, gotta love the hustle and endurance of Kirishima, man, as he would catch it too and refuse to fall over. Now, Kirishima in the previous chapter also expressed a desire to speak to Deku, and right here, he would manage to do so by saying that he remembered a story on the news once about a boy around his age who'd rushed in to save his friend from a villain and question and confirm that that was in fact Deku. Of course, referring to the sludge villain incident in which Deku went to save Bakugo. What was no doubt a very impactful moment for Kirishima to hear about, as when faced by a similar predicament himself, albeit with a far more dangerous villain and no heroes on the scene, he inversely froze in fear. And Kirishima would then express that being a hero has nothing to do with being especially strong or special, that more than anything it was his attitude back then that is the key. Which certainly reminds me of the sentiments expressed by Crimson Riot, Kirishima's heroic inspiration, in regards to his own gender-neutral perspective on manliness as a concept. And Ida would then say that Kirishima was there at just the right time, which Kirishima would then respond to by saying that it was sheer coincidence, as Endeavor had ordered them to go in this direction in the first place. But just then, all of their fellow classmates would make their way over. And at that, Mina would be the first one to speak, now telling Deku to cut it out with all of that alone stuff and just come back with them, as she wanted them all to be able to go back to having classes together. From there, Deku would stumble to his feet, stepping away from Kirishima and Ida, as he would express that he would love to return, but it's just far too dangerous. That there are just so many people at UA, and he does not want to cause them any more trouble. And it was clear that Deku was willing to continue resisting here, as he would begin to outstretch some tired looking tendrils of Black Whip from his body, saying that he could not go back to how he was before. But it was then that Bakugo would approach. He'd begin by asking Deku if he remembered what he had told him after he was stabbed by Shigaraki. But Deku didn't remember, which I'm not surprised by at all, seeing as how he flew into such an all-consuming rage at the time. But Bakugo would repeat, "Don't even think about winning this alone." After saying this, his body moved on its own and he was impaled in Deku's stead. But regardless, he knew that he needed to tell Deku those words, what could have very well been his final words. He continued by saying that he had always looked down on Deku for being quirkless, but despite Deku always being far behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow Deku was miles ahead of him. As Horikoshi would then provide us with a visual of them being children in this instance, something that he seems to be doing a lot more lately. But yeah, Bakugo would admit to hating that feeling, a feeling he did not want at all and one that he refused to recognize as such, saying that it is the very reason why he grew so distant from Deku and so thoroughly bullied him. And mind you, all of Class 1A is here listening to this, so yeah, this is the real deal. It takes a whole lot for a character like Bakugo to do something like this, let alone in front of so many people. Now with them visually at the point of middle school, Bakugo would say that he opposed Deku and constantly tried to express his superiority over him, but in the end, he always lost. That furthermore, after getting into UA, literally nothing went as he thought it would. That he'd from then on spent his days trying to figure out Deku's strengths and weaknesses. And at this point, he would admit that it is probably meaningless telling him all this, but it's truly how he feels, as he would actually address Deku by his name, Izuku, which is to me like Vegeta calling Goku, Goku instead of Kakarot. I mean, he is the one who created the name Deku in the first place. It's crazy. But all of this would ultimately culminate into an apology, a sincere apology for everything that he had done up to this point, as he would then lower his head through this downpour of rain. And I mean, Deku, like myself in reading this, was at a loss for words here, but Bakugo was not finished. He'd also say that the path Deku had undergone as the successor of One for All is precisely what All Might did, and so in that sense, it wasn't necessarily wrong, but even still, the reality of the situation was that he could barely manage to stand by his lonesome right now. That in the end, his ideals could only carry him so far. That if there is anything in his way making his path difficult, he could always count on them for help. That in order to surpass his idol All Might, they would have to protect UA and the civilians in there together. That this was the only way forward. And in hearing all of this, Deku's resistance would actually dissipate as he would realize just how far ahead everyone else was in their consideration of all of this. Again, he would repeat to himself, "You guys can't keep up." As he would begin to fall, he would apologize for saying such a horrible thing to them. But before he could even hit the ground, Bakugo was there to catch him and say that he knows. And with that, they had him. Wow, that was heavy. That was special. I mean, there is so much to unpack there that it deserves a video of its own, so look forward to that. But furthermore, notice how so many of these characters have had their moments, their intense moments with Deku during this conflict. However, despite an attempt, Uraraka has yet to do so just yet. But best believe, her time is coming. But Momo, now speaking to her, would say that although they had managed to complete the first step, things will only become that much more difficult from now on, which Uraraka would agree to. Now, sometime later, Deku would begin to regain consciousness, then awakening to the words of the hero, 13. Her helmet was now off, now revealing her face for the first time, and she looks pretty simple here. But she would go on to explain that right now most civilians were moving to various evacuation centers. The ones remaining outside were anti-hero vigilantes and extremists that became violent alongside the prison escapees. However, the number of anti-hero civilians in each evacuation center was increasing due to their exhaustion. Now, the extremists tend to work in groups, making them pretty easy to catch for the heroes, and so as evacuations continue, it becomes easier and easier to avoid both groups out in the streets. Now, everyone was doing their part for the sake of improving the overall situation, and truly, Deku's solo escapades did seriously help the heroes and police tremendously. And right now, UA looked entirely different. It actually looked even more secure than Tartarus, so much so that Deku could not believe his eyes. And Sarah would then explain that the UA barrier was currently in place, with the wall only being a glimpse at what it is truly capable of. Which then prompted Invisible Girl to elaborate a bit to say that the security system is really something, as it even connects to Shiketsu High. And Deku really wanted to live up to the expectations of his friends here, but he would express that going back simply was not an option for him, as very clearly, it was pretty noisy inside. And from here, we would have a ton of civilians rejecting Deku's entrance, and they would cry out that the rumor of a boy Shigaraki was after must be him. And Deku's expression here was an empty one. President Mike was now on a megaphone, which says a lot if he needed one, trying his best to calm them down to no avail. They would cry out that the principal guaranteed their safety, that they had left their homes for the sake of that guarantee, and so Deku being here was like a ticking time bomb with them at the very same time. That if they are going to hide him somewhere else that isn't UA. As to this, Deku would simply begin to leave without a word. But just then, to continue this trend of hand-holding, Uraraka would grab hold of Deku, as she would then tell him not to worry about it. They would not let go of him again, and they could not. As to close out this chapter again, the most pressing question of Uraraka's existence in the story, who will save heroes when they are in trouble, would be considered. But yeah, that was the chapter. What an emotional experience that was. I mean, sure, with the previous chapter discussion, we played around the idea of Deku apologizing, but truthfully, I did not expect it here and now, but it is just so major for the growth in these characters and their overall dynamic. Now, in regards to the civilians, it is just so bold to me that they would not only refuse a child, but also refuse him refuge in the school that he literally attends. That is actually so wild to me, and I get it with the situation and all, but damn. When faced by trying circumstances, it is unsettling to see just how ugly people can be in the midst of tragedy. But with the whole convincing Deku thing officially being over, do me a favor and bear in mind that only 2 members of Class 1A did not get a chance to convey their feelings towards Deku, Invisible Girl and Oyama. And listen, there are a lot of these characters, man. It is hard to give them all their moment, I understand that, but to have gotten stuff from characters like Koda and Sato, who I can't even think of a single notable interaction involving them. I mean, come on, Sato literally had to have something off screen brought up about food coloring. And so I cannot see how it is not the least bit strange that a character like Oyama, who is deeply related to Deku in the past, was not given such an opportunity. Take it as you will, but the real ones already know how we feel about Oyama over here. And in that sense, Invisible Girl is looking like a misdirect to me, which makes sense. Hard to trust someone entirely when you can't see them, I suppose. Again, that Bakugo character development is straight up immaculate, and I am so excited to see where we go from here in that regard. And if you'd like to be here for all that and more, be sure to subscribe to Plot Armor with notifications on to never miss a thing. And if you'd like to get your hands on some manga of your own, head on over to RightStuf.com using our affiliate link in the description below, as it really helps out the channel, because when it comes to bringing you some of the best My Hero Academia content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Sliceable Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.